Tonight, we have a long and complete story for you. It is the story of a boy who could walk through the world's most secure digital walls, a ghost in the machine who challenged the most powerful institutions on Earth. And it is the story of how, years later, the very government that hunted him would come to ask for his help. This is a journey into an unseen world, a story designed to occupy your mind and gently guide you toward a state of deep and peaceful rest. So now is the time. Find a comfortable position. Let the noise and the weight of the day begin to fade from your awareness. There is nothing for you to do now, nothing to solve, and nowhere else you need to be. Settle into the stillness, close your eyes, and allow our story to begin. In the nascent days of the dial-up modem, when the internet was more a sound than a place, a young boy named Tommy DeVos made a simple typing error. With a single keystroke, he wandered into a room he was never meant to find, and in its quiet, flickering text, he heard the first whispers of a different world, echoes in a digital room. In the nascent days of the dial-up modem, when the internet was more a sound than a place, a young boy named Tommy DeVos made a simple typing error. With a single keystroke, he wandered into a room he was never meant to find, and in its quiet, flickering text, he heard the first whispers of a different world. It was the sound of a hidden architecture, a language of pure potential humming just beneath the surface of a world that was only beginning to understand what it meant to be connected. This was a time before the web had pictures and colors for everyone, a time when its frontiers were vast, unmapped territories of green and amber characters on a black screen. For a curious mind, it was a universe waiting to be read. Every afternoon, after the structured world of school, Tommy would retreat to this digital frontier. The ritual began with a symphony of electronic screeches and hisses, the handshake between his computer and the network, a sound that promised entry into a space without physical walls or familiar geography. His destination was usually a simple channel on internet relay chat, a bustling public square of text where conversations flowed in real time. But on one particular afternoon, sometime around 1994, his fingers moved with an unconscious haste. Instead of the intended address, he typed a slightly different command, a simple transposition of letters that would alter the course of his life. He had intended to join the channel of a friend, but instead, the screen refreshed to reveal a place he did not recognize. It was a private room, a digital space run by a user with the alias Disnoots. The channel was unlike the others he had frequented. The conversation was sparse, cryptic, and technical. There were no pleasantries, no idle chatter about school or music. Instead, the user spoke of systems he had never heard of vulnerabilities and exploits, of pathways into secured machine. It was as if he had inadvertently pushed open a door and found himself in the quiet workshop of the world's unseen architects. The text scrolled by like a secret river, carrying fragments of a language he could not yet decipher, but felt an immediate, magnetic pull toward. He did not announce his presence. He simply sat and watched, a silent observer in a room full of ghosts, their words painting pictures of a world that operated on a completely different set of rules. This was not just a place for conversation. It was a place where things were done, a place of action and consequence in a realm that most people did not even know existed. Day after day, the accidental discovery became a deliberate ritual. He would come home, connect to the network, and slip back into that same room, a quiet apprentice listening from the shadows. For weeks, he remained a ghost, absorbing the terminology, the cadence of the conversations, the very culture of this small, isolated tribe. He began to understand that these individuals were a part of something larger, a loose confederation of explorers who saw the growing digital landscape not as a series of destinations, but as a single, interconnected machine, a machine they were learning to map, to understand, and to influence. The allure was not one of malice, but of knowledge. It was the simple, profound appeal of understanding how something works on its most fundamental level. Eventually, his passive observation gave way to an irrepressible curiosity. He began to ask questions. They were the simple, naive inquiries of a child who had stumbled into a graduate-level seminar. Who was this person? What did that term mean? How did one accomplish such a thing? To the established members of the channel, his presence was an anomaly, an unwelcome noise in their carefully controlled environment. Their response was swift and decisive. He was banned, his connection to the room severed. The door was shut, but in the simple architecture of early internet relay chat, a ban was a temporary inconvenience, not a permanent barrier. All he had to do was disconnect from the server, reconnect to obtain a new, anonymous identity, and walk right back in. This began a peculiar and patient dance that lasted for months. He would enter the room, ask his questions, and be removed. He would then quietly reappear moments later, undeterred, his curiosity overriding any sense of intimidation or rejection. He was not being defiant, he was simply being persistent. It was a testament to a singular focus, a relentless desire to understand the echoes he had heard in that digital room. To the operators of the channel, this recurring presence became a strange fixture. The anonymous kid who kept coming back, whose thirst for knowledge was so great that he was willing to endure constant rejection, became less of an annoyance and more of an enigma. They had built digital walls to keep people out. Yet, here was someone who treated those walls as little more than a gentle suggestion. The turning point did not arrive with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet resignation. After months of this patient siege, the gatekeeper, the user known as Znoots, finally relented. Perhaps he saw a reflection of his own early curiosity in the boy's unwavering persistence. Perhaps he simply grew tired of the ritual of banning him. Whatever the reason, the dynamic shifted. The wall that had been so steadfastly maintained was lowered, and a single, simple instruction was offered in its place. It was not a grand welcome, nor was it an offer of mentorship. It was a challenge, a quest in its most basic form. He was told to go to the search engines of the day, to Yahoo and Alta Vista, and to read everything he could possibly find on the subject of hacking. This was the first true key he had ever been given. It was not a password to a system or a piece of malicious code. It was far more valuable than that. It was a key to the library, a map to the vast, decentralized repository of knowledge that hackers had been compiling for years in digital magazines and on hidden message boards. He was not being taught how to hack. He was being instructed on how to learn, how to take the initiative, and forge his own understanding from the raw material of the network itself. The gatekeepers were not going to lead him by the hand. They had simply pointed him toward the path. For the young Tommy DeVos, this was the moment the world expanded. The quiet, cryptic chat room was no longer the sole source of his fascination. It was now a starting point, a compass pointing toward a much larger world. The instruction was simple, yet it held the weight of a formal invitation. He had found the door, and now he had been shown the way to the knowledge that lay beyond. Those damn kids. Every ecosystem develops its own strange forms of life. And, on the quiet, text-based plains of the early internet, new tribes were beginning to form. Armed with the knowledge he had diligently gathered, Tommy DeVos took the first step in creating a new self, a digital persona forged in the anonymity of the network. He chose a name, a handle that would serve as his calling card in this unseen world, Doggy G. And with this new identity, he went in search of his own tribe, a group that shared his burgeoning passion for exploring the hidden mechanics of cyberspace. He found them in a small, ambitious crew who called themselves TDK, a name that was less a title and more a self-aware declaration of their nature, those damn kids. This was not a gang in any traditional sense, but rather a digital club for the curious and the clever. They were a collective of young, bright minds from disparate parts of the world, united by the shared space of the network and a fascination with its underlying structure. For Tommy, finding TDK was like finding a lost language he was only just beginning to learn, now spoken fluently all around him. The sense of belonging was immediate and profound. Here, his obsessive curiosity was not an anomaly, but a prerequisite. The long hours he spent in front of the screen, deciphering technical manuals and reading through the archives of the digital underground, were a shared experience, a common pursuit of a deeper understanding. The group became his classroom and his laboratory, a place where theoretical knowledge could be put into practice. The primary focus of TDK, their chosen arena for experimentation and competition, was a series of strategic contests known as the Internet Relay Chat Wars. These took place on a popular network called EFNet, a sprawling collection of servers that hosted thousands of themed chat rooms, or channels. In this world, control was everything. Each channel had operators, users with special privileges who could manage the conversation and police the room. For the members of TDK, the ultimate challenge was to wrest control of these channels from their established operators. It was a silent, intricate game of digital chess, played out in real time across a global network. The goal was not destruction, but displacement, a demonstration of superior technical skill and strategic thinking. It was a way to leave a mark, to prove that you could outmaneuver the gatekeepers on their own turf. To achieve this, the group employed a sophisticated set of tools and techniques, chief among them the construction of botnets. A botnet, in its simplest form, is a network of computers that have been quietly enlisted to act in unison, controlled from a central point. For TDK, these were not instruments of widespread chaos, but precision tools. They were like a finely tuned orchestra, capable of generating a symphony of digital requests aimed at a single, specific target. The group would painstakingly build these networks, finding and leveraging small security oversights in machines across the internet, slowly gathering the resources they needed for their strategic operations. This process was a craft in itself, requiring patience, subtlety, and an intimate knowledge of how different systems communicated. Their strategy for a channel takeover was methodical. First, they would conduct reconnaissance, quietly mapping out the digital landscape of their target channel. They would check every operator in the room, identifying which server on the vast EFNet network each one was connected to. The objective was to find a server that was hosting one of the channel's operators, but which had no operators of its own present. This was the vulnerable point in the network's armor, the one loose thread in the tapestry. Once this weak point was identified, the operation would begin. The botnet would be activated, directing a controlled flood of data at the target server. This maneuver, known as a distributed denial of service, was not a blunt instrument of force, but a delicate manipulation of traffic. It was akin to creating a phantom traffic jam on a single digital roadway, effectively isolating that server from the rest of the network for a brief period. The result was a phenomenon known as a server split. For a few critical moments, the targeted server would be severed from the EFNet collective, creating two separate temporary versions of the network. On the main part of the network, the operator connected to the isolated server would seem to disappear. In that instant of confusion, TDK would make their move, promoting their own members to operator status and seizing control of the channel. When the split healed and the network stitched itself back together, the channel's original hierarchy would be gone, replaced by the quiet, victorious presence of those damn kids. It was an elegant and audacious manipulation of the network's own physics, using its interconnected nature against itself to achieve a desired outcome. This was the world where Tommy began to truly hone his craft. The chat room wars were a low-stakes environment, a digital sandbox where he could test his skills, learn from his mistakes, and understand the practical application of the theories he had read about. The consequences were ephemeral. Control of a chat room was a fleeting prize, often lost as quickly as it was won, but the knowledge gained was permanent. He was learning about network topology, about system vulnerabilities, and about the psychology of control in a digital space. It was during this time that he began to try on the persona of the Black Hat. In the lexicon of the digital world, this was the identity of one who operates outside the established rules, who explores the system by pushing its boundaries, often to their breaking point. For Tommy and the others in TDK, wearing this hat was not a conscious choice of good versus evil. It was an expression of their fundamental approach to technology, a belief that the only way to truly understand a system is to test its limits. The Black Hat was a mask of anonymity and a symbol of power. It allowed a teenager in his bedroom to become a formidable force in the digital arena, a player in a game that the vast majority of the world did not even know was being played. The thrill was not in causing grief, but in solving the puzzle, in discovering a weakness and proving that it could be exploited. Each successful channel takeover was another solved problem, another validation of their skill and ingenuity. The battles for these text-based kingdoms were a form of practice, a series of rehearsals for a much larger stage. The skills being sharpened in the quiet, flickering light of a computer monitor were real and potent. He had learned the art of digital influence, the mechanics of leveraging small flaws to achieve significant results. And as his confidence grew, so too did his ambition. The world of internet relay chat was a fascinating but ultimately limited playground. Soon, he would begin to wonder what other systems, what other puzzles lay waiting for him beyond the ephemeral walls of the chat room. The unseen kingdom. The confines of a high school classroom can feel impossibly small to a mind that has learned to travel without moving. For Tommy DeVos, the digital world was a vast, unseen kingdom of limitless possibility, and the mundane, structured world of his 9 o'clock computer class was a cage he was quickly learning how to unlock. While his classmates struggled with the fundamentals of QBasic, a simple programming language, he found himself adrift in a sea of idle time. The assignments designed to occupy an hour would take him mere minutes, leaving him with a silent, humming computer and a direct, unfiltered connection to the sprawling network that lay just beyond the school's firewall. It was in these quiet moments of profound boredom that the seeds of his first significant transgressions were sown. His initial forays were not born of malice, but of a simple, adolescent desire to alter his immediate reality. Trapped in the quiet hum of the computer lab, his greatest wish was to be outside, under the open sky. He saw the school's internet connection not as a tool for education, but as a single, fragile thread that tethered the classroom to its rigid schedule. If he could gently sever that thread, even for a short time, the entire structure would collapse, and he would be free. The solution, from his perspective, was both elegant and logical. Using the skills he had been honing in the digital underground, he orchestrated a small, targeted, distributed denial of service. It was not a destructive attack, but a subtle manipulation of data flow, a quiet and overwhelming chorus of digital noise directed at the school's own internet protocol address. The effect was immediate. The connection, unable to process the phantom traffic, simply gave way. The thread was cut. Throughout the school, the internet went down, and with it, the lesson plan for his computer class. As he had predicted, the disruption was enough to derail the day's activities, and soon the students were released to go and play outside. It was a quiet, victimless act of rebellion, a simple exertion of will upon a system he understood better than his teachers did. He had treated the problem of boredom as a technical puzzle and had engineered a successful solution. The school's administration, however, saw it differently. When the source of the disruption was traced back to his terminal, The response was a 3-day suspension. It was his first formal punishment, a gentle tap on the wrist that served not as a deterrent, but as a confirmation that his actions in the digital world could have tangible effects in the physical one. The lesson he took from this experience was not that he should stop, but that he needed to be more ambitious and more careful. His next plan was a far more intricate and complex machine, a convoluted scheme designed to achieve the very same outcome: a single day of freedom. The goal was simple: a day away from school to spend his time as he wished, perhaps by the quiet currents of the local river. The method, however, was a breathtakingly reckless display of technical overreach. The plan began with a journey halfway around the world, through the silent, invisible corridors of the internet. He sought an anonymous starting point, a remote computer that could not be easily traced back to his home in Virginia. He found it in the systems of a military base in Korea. This was not the target of his operation, but merely a convenient, ghost-like platform from which to launch the next phase of his plan. Once inside the military's network, he moved with a quiet precision. He identified the Personal America online account of the base's commanding general, and, using the skills he had acquired, he hijacked it. He now possessed a digital voice that carried with it the weight of immense authority. From this commandeered account, he composed a simple, chilling email. The recipient was the superintendent of his own school district in Hanover County. The message was a stark and unambiguous bomb threat, warning that one of the high schools in the county was set to explode at 10:30 that morning. The threat was a complete fabrication, a piece of digital fiction crafted for a single purpose: to trigger the predictable, systematic response of the school authorities. He knew that such a message, coming from such an authoritative source, could not be ignored. The plan worked perfectly. School was canceled. The county's educational system was thrown into a state of alarm, and he was granted his wish for a day of unstructured freedom. He had built a complex, multi-stage international hacking operation, all to engineer a single day off. But the very complexity that made his plan so effective in the digital realm was also its undoing in the analog world. A scheme of this nature, with such a dramatic outcome, was a secret too grand for a teenager to keep. In a simple, careless moment of pride, he told a friend what he had done. He had claimed responsibility for the day of chaos, and that single admission, a quiet whisper in the social network of his high school, proved to be a more effective tracing mechanism than any forensic tool. The information traveled from one person to another, a cascading wave of rumor and revelation, until it reached the ears of the school's administration. When he arrived at school the next day, the illusion of his anonymity was shattered. He was met at the entrance not by his teachers or classmates, but by two men in suits. They stood on either side of the door, their presence a stark and ominous signal that the game had changed. They asked him to come with them, and he was quietly escorted away. He was expelled, his time as a student brought to an abrupt and permanent end. But the consequences were only just beginning to unfold. Because he had used the internet to cross state and international lines, his actions had attracted the attention of a much higher authority. About 2 weeks later, the full weight of that attention arrived at his home. The raid was not a loud, chaotic affair. It was a quiet and methodical procedure, a calm and surreal intrusion of the federal government into the suburban landscape of his family's life. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation came to his house, their purpose not to arrest him, but to collect the evidence of his unseen life. They took everything related to his digital existence, his computers, his floppy disks, every compact disc, every piece of paper with handwritten notes. They were dismantling his workshop, piece by piece, taking with them the tangible artifacts of his travels through the unseen kingdom. This was the first time the consequences of his actions had manifested with such undeniable force. The boundary between his two worlds had been irrevocably breached. For his exploits, he was formally charged with violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, a federal law that transformed his teenage transgressions into a serious criminal matter. His machines were gone, and the quiet hum of his digital life had been replaced by a deafening silence. But in that silence, with time now an abundant and unstructured commodity, new and more ambitious ideas would begin to take root. A world of hell. After his first encounter with the law, the clear path might have been to retreat into the quiet analog world he had so eagerly sought to escape. But for some, the discovery of a boundary is not a warning, but an invitation to see what lies beyond it. The seizure of his computers had created a forced silence, a period of disconnection from the unseen kingdom. Yet, this silence did not breed caution. Instead, it sharpened his resolve. As the federal investigation into the school bomb threat proceeded at its own deliberate pace, Tommy acquired a new machine and re-established his connection to the network. He did not return to the playful mischief of his past. He returned with a new sense of purpose, seeking a greater challenge and a more disciplined arena for his skills. A new group soon emerged on his horizon, one with a rigid structure, a clear philosophy, and a name that promised a deeper journey into the shadows. World of Hell. His entry into this new circle was facilitated by a single conversation with one of its members, a hacker who went by the alias Rafa. Through their quiet, text-based exchanges, a different vision of the digital underground began to take shape. This was not a loose collective of teenagers engaged in territorial disputes over chat rooms. World of Hell was a far more serious and structured organization. They operated with a strict code of conduct, a set of rules that transformed their activities from random acts of digital vandalism into a focused and disciplined craft. The group's philosophy was built on a foundation of challenge and prestige. It was this sense of a higher purpose, of a more refined and meaningful pursuit, that drew Tommy in. He was no longer just a kid looking to cause a disruption. He was an aspiring artisan seeking a guild. The rules of World of Hell were simple, yet they fundamentally reshaped the landscape of his activities. The first and most important rule was that members were only allowed to target systems running on the Unix operating system or its derivatives. In the architecture of the early 2000s, this was a critical distinction. The far more common Windows systems were viewed by the group as fragile, insecure, and ultimately too easy. To breach a Windows machine was considered a trivial exercise, unworthy of a skilled practitioner. Unix, on the other hand, was the bedrock of the serious internet. It was the operating system that powered the servers of universities, of major corporations, and of government institutions. It was a more robust, complex, and secure environment. To focus exclusively on Unix was to commit to a higher degree of difficulty. It was the difference between a street brawler and a dedicated martial artist who would only engage with an equally skilled opponent. The second rule dictated the nature of their targets. Members of World of Hell were to direct their efforts only toward the highest echelons of the digital world, the networks of government agencies, the servers of the military, and the sprawling digital infrastructures of Fortune 500 companies. This was not about petty disruption or personal gain. It was about making a statement on the largest and most visible stages imaginable. Their philosophy was akin to a form of digital mountaineering, a constant search for the highest, most treacherous, and most heavily guarded peaks in the cyberspace. The goal was to prove they could be summited, to demonstrate that no system, no matter how powerful or well-funded, was truly impenetrable. For Tommy, these rules provided the structure and the challenge he had been craving. He embraced this new code of conduct, and with it, a new and more potent sense of identity. In June of 2001, he undertook his rite of passage, his first official act as a participant in World of Hell's campaign. His chosen target was both ambitious and deeply symbolic. He directed his attention to the Virginia Department of Informational Technology, the very entity responsible for managing the digital infrastructure of his home state. The process was a patient and methodical one, a quiet and obsessive search for a single, overlooked flaw in the state's digital fortress. In the late hours of the night, he would probe the systems, testing their defenses, looking for a subtle inconsistency, a digital seam that he could gently pry open. When he finally found it, the moment of entry was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, satisfying click, as a lock that was supposed to hold firm simply gave way. He now had access. He could move silently through the state's most critical systems, but his purpose was not to steal information or to cause lasting damage. It was to leave a mark. This act, in the parlance of the hacking world, is known as a website defacement. It is a digital act of supreme trespassing, a quiet and unambiguous demonstration of control. It is like a master graffiti artist gaining access to a seemingly unreachable place, the highest wall of a guarded compound, and leaving behind a single, elegant tag. The art is not in the destruction of the wall, but in the simple, undeniable proof of presence. He altered the state's main website, replacing its official content with a digital calling card, a simple message proclaiming that the system had been breached by World of Hell. It was his signature on a masterpiece of infiltration, his proof that he belonged in this new guild. This first successful operation opened the floodgates. For the next 6 to 9 months, he entered a state of profound and singular focus. The looming threat of his federal court case, the concerns of his family, the entire apparatus of the outside world, it all seemed to fade into a distant, muffled background. His reality was reduced to the cool, steady glow of his monitor and the infinite, intricate puzzle of the network. His life fell into a simple, hypnotic rhythm. Find a target, study its architecture, locate a weakness, gain entry, and leave the group's mark. Then, he would move on to the next, the process repeating in a continuous, unbroken loop. He was living as a ghost in the machine, a silent presence in the world's most secure servers. He moved through the digital landscape with an almost voracious appetite, a quiet and methodical force of disruption. The names of the companies and organizations that fell under his influence read like a catalog of global power and commerce. One day, it would be a luxury car manufacturer, the next a multinational technology corporation, and the next a critical government agency. He was no longer just a boy in a bedroom. He was an agent of a global phenomenon, a key player in a coordinated campaign that was leaving its mark on the very fabric of the emerging digital world. For 9 months, he lived and breathed this single-minded pursuit, his name a whisper among the architects of the systems he so effortlessly navigated. But ghosts who leave such clear and public footprints are destined, eventually, to be followed. A cascade of falling dominoes. There is a rhythm to a deep and consuming passion, a hypnotic pattern of repetition that can make even the most perilous acts feel normal, almost meditative. For the better part of a year, between 2001 and 2002, Tommy DeVos lived entirely inside this rhythm. He moved through the digital world not with the chaotic energy of a vandal, but with the quiet, focused precision of a master craftsman. He was a silent orchestrator of digital chaos, a solitary figure watching as titan after titan of the corporate and government worlds fell like a cascade of silent, perfectly aligned dominoes. Each successful breach was not a conclusion, but merely the trigger for the next, a continuous and self-perpetuating cycle of challenge and conquest that seemed as if it could go on forever. The psychological state required for this kind of sustained activity is one of profound immersion. It is a form of deep focus where the external world, with its attendant fears and consequences, simply fades into an irrelevant background hum. His existence became a simple, repeating loop. The selection of a target, the patient study of its digital architecture, the methodical search for a single point of weakness, and the quiet, electric thrill of the moment when a barrier gives way. The reward was not financial, nor was it the acquisition of secrets. The reward was the solution itself. It was the intellectual satisfaction of solving an impossibly complex puzzle, of finding the one loose thread in a vast and intricate tapestry and pulling it to see the entire pattern shift. This pursuit became an addiction of the mind, a constant gnawing hunger for the next problem, the next breakthrough, the next quiet moment of absolute control. His journey through the digital landscape was a grand tour of the modern world's hidden infrastructure. The list of targets grew to read like a directory of global power. He began by testing the very architects of his world, the technology companies whose hardware and software formed the backbone of the internet itself. He moved with a ghostly silence through the networks of Hewlett-Packard, of Toshiba, of Acer, and Motorola. These were not acts of aggression, but a form of quiet, intimate conversation with the creators of the digital age. He was testing the strength of their creations, examining their work on a level that even their own engineers might not have considered, looking for the small, human errors left behind in the complex machinery of their systems. Each successful incursion was a whisper back to the giants of the industry, a quiet testament to the fact that no creation is ever truly perfect. From the world of technology, his attention drifted to the icons of global commerce and luxury, the brands that defined aspiration and status in the physical world. He found his way into the systems of automobile manufacturers like Mercedes-Benz, Audi, and Volvo. He explored the digital vaults of luxury brands like Rolex. He left his mark on the websites of global apparel companies like Reebok. There was a surreal duality to these acts. Here was a teenager, sitting in a simple bedroom, who could wander at will through the most private, internal spaces of companies whose products were symbols of a world far beyond his physical reach. He could not afford the cars or the watches, but he could hold the keys to their digital kingdoms, a far more intoxicating form of possession. His curiosity then led him to the vast, complex systems that underpinned everyday life and culture. He slipped through the defenses of United Airlines, exploring the intricate networks that managed the logistics of global travel. He navigated the servers of Sony Music, the digital storehouse for the work of countless artists. He even found his way into the systems of Pfizer, a giant of the pharmaceutical industry. These were not mere websites. They were the digital nervous systems of massive, sprawling organizations. His presence within them was a quiet reminder of the fragility of this new, interconnected world. The machinery that kept planes in the air, that distributed music to the masses, that managed the data of a global healthcare company, was all built upon a foundation of code. And any code, no matter how carefully written, could have flaws. The pinnacle of his audacity, the highest and most challenging peaks of his digital mountaineering, came when he turned his attention to the sanctums of institutional power. He successfully breached the networks of the United States Department of Energy and the digital court systems of the United States government. These were acts of incredible boldness, a direct challenge to the most well-defended and consequential systems in the world. From his perspective, this was not an act of espionage or political defiance. It was the ultimate test of his skill. He was driven by a simple, powerful question. Could it be done? The answer, time and time again, was yes. With each new high-profile success, his sense of invincibility grew. The lack of any immediate, tangible consequence created a powerful and dangerous feedback loop. The digital world began to feel like a separate reality, a place with its own rules, or perhaps no rules at all. He was a ghost, leaving his spectral signature on servers across the globe before vanishing back into the anonymity of the network. He was operating on a level of sophistication that was almost unimaginable for a boy who had not yet turned 18. He was a minor, still subject to the rules of his parents' house, Yet he was waging a quiet, one-man campaign of disruption against the most powerful entities on the planet. But even the most silent of falling dominoes makes a sound upon impact. And the cascade he had initiated was beginning to create a subtle but undeniable pattern of noise. In the quiet data centers of corporations and the sterile server rooms of government agencies, security professionals were beginning to notice the footprints he left behind. The same digital calling card, the signature of World of Hell, was appearing in too many places at once. A lone incident might be dismissed as an anomaly, but a consistent pattern of breaches across dozens of unrelated, high-security networks pointed to a coordinated and highly effective operation. The digital world and the physical world are not separate forever. They are two sides of the same coin, destined to eventually land on one face or the other. For Tommy, the coin had been spinning for a very long time, but it was about to come to rest. The Men in Black. The morning of June 12, 2002, began with the mundane promise of an ordinary day. There was a shift at work to be completed, and later, the simple pleasure of a newly released film, a science fiction comedy about secret agents and alien life. The night before, Tommy had downloaded a copy of the movie, Men in Black 2, its digital bits and bytes settling onto his hard drive in silent anticipation. His plan for the day was simple and unassuming. He would go to work, come home a little early, and share the film with his sister. It was a plan rooted in the quiet, familiar rhythms of a life that felt, on the surface, completely normal. But forces were already in motion, unseen and unheard, and the fictional men in black on his computer screen would soon be eclipsed by the very real ones who were about to arrive at his door. He moved through the first part of his day, untroubled by any sense of foreboding. The sun rose and set as it always did. The world of corporate servers and digital vulnerabilities felt a universe away from the simple tasks of his job. When he left work, the feeling was one of mild and pleasant anticipation, the kind of quiet contentment that comes from a day's work done and an evening of leisure ahead. He made his way home to his apartment, the place that served as both his sanctuary and the silent epicenter of his global campaign of digital disruption. As he approached his front door, there was no indication that his life was moments away from being fractured. The air was still, the hallway was empty. He reached for the handle, ready to step back into the private world he had so carefully constructed. The sequence of events that followed unfolded in a span of seconds, yet for him, they seemed to stretch into an eternity of slow, crystalline horror. As his hand made contact with the doorknob, he felt it move before he could turn it. The door was not pushed open. It was pulled, yanked inward with a sudden, decisive force that took him completely by surprise. The space where the door had been was instantly filled by a sight that did not belong to his world. It was the flat, black, circular muzzle of an M16 rifle, held steady and aimed directly at his face. Behind it stood a figure clad in black tactical gear. His mind struggled to process the image, to reconcile the familiar hallway of his apartment building with the sudden, overwhelming presence of military-grade force. He was pulled, or perhaps he simply stumbled, across the threshold into his own home, and the scene that met his eyes was one of surreal and terrifying invasion. His small living room was no longer his own. It was a crowded, teeming command center, filled with an impossible number of agents. There were somewhere between 20 and 30 of them, a silent, disciplined army that had materialized within the walls of his home. They moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency, a stark and chilling contrast to the domestic familiarity of the space. In the midst of this controlled chaos, he saw his sister. She was sitting on the couch, her body trembling, her face streaked with tears. She was a fixed point of human suffering in a room of cold, professional motion. And then he saw his father, standing next to her in the living room. He was not crying, nor was he angry. He was perfectly still, his expression a mask of profound and weary resignation. When his father's eyes met his, there was no shout of admonishment, no outburst of fury. There was only a single, slow, and devastating shake of the head. It was a gesture that contained within it the entire weight of his disappointment, a silent communication that spoke of a trust broken and a future irrevocably altered. In that one quiet moment, the abstract consequences of his digital life became a tangible and heartbreaking reality. The disappointment in his father's eyes was more damning than any weapon, more terrifying than any federal agent. His internal state collapsed into a condition of pure, cold shock. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the room fading into a distant, muffled roar. He was an observer of his own life's unraveling. The agents, meanwhile, proceeded with their task with an almost surgical precision. This was not a frantic, chaotic search. It was a methodical and comprehensive dismantling of his entire existence. They moved from room to room, their purpose clear and unwavering. They were there to erase his digital identity from the physical world. They took every computer, every monitor, every keyboard. They confiscated every stray component, every loose cable and circuit board. The collection of floppy disks and compact disks that held his tools, his notes, and his treasures was boxed up and taken away. They took every piece of paper that had handwritten notes on it, every scribbled password, every diagram of a network he had drawn. They were not just taking his possessions, they were seizing the very artifacts of his craft, the physical remnants of his thoughts and his explorations. The process was a quiet and efficient testament to the thoroughness of their investigation. They knew what they were looking for, and they knew that in his world, a single stray note, a single forgotten disk, could hold the key to an entire universe of illicit activity. He stood there, a prisoner in his own home, watching as the two halves of his life, the ordinary young man and the master hacker known as Doggy G, were being forcibly reconciled before his eyes. The game was over. That much was clear. The sense of invincibility he had cultivated over years of successful, seemingly consequence-free operations evaporated in an instant, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a trapped animal. The anonymity that had been his shield, the digital ether that had been his hiding place, had proven to be no defense at all. The agents of the physical world had simply walked through the door. When they finally departed, they left behind a profound and unnerving silence. The machines that had filled his rooms with their quiet, steady hum were gone. The blinking lights of the modems and routers were extinguished. The tools of his trade, the keys to his unseen kingdom, had all been carried away. All that remained was the quiet, heavy air of consequence, and the knowledge that his world and his life had been irrevocably broken in two, a fortnight of freedom. What does one do with the final, numbered moments of a life that is about to be taken away? When freedom is no longer an abstract concept, but a finite resource, a commodity with a known and rapidly approaching expiration date, every choice becomes imbued with a profound and heavy significance. Given 2 weeks between the quiet, comprehensive dismantling of his world and his day in court, the 19-year-old Tommy DeVos was faced with this very question. He chose not to hide, nor to retreat into a state of quiet repentance. He chose instead to live with a desperate, all-consuming intensity, a final, fleeting fortnight of borrowed time. The raid had left a vacuum in its wake. The digital world, the unseen kingdom where he had spent the better part of his adolescence, was gone. The portals to that realm, his computers had been confiscated, and the quiet, hypnotic rhythm of his online life was replaced by a stark and unfamiliar silence. All that remained was the ticking clock of the physical world, each passing day bringing him closer to a future he knew would be defined by confinement. This knowledge did not paralyze him with fear. Instead, it acted as a strange and powerful catalyst. The certainty of his impending loss made the present moment feel impossibly vibrant, a brilliant burning flame against the encroaching darkness. He resolved to spend his remaining 196 hours not in mourning for the life that was ending, but in a frantic, heartfelt celebration of it. His days became a kind of farewell tour, a deliberate and almost mournful series of goodbyes to the simple freedoms he had always taken for granted. He sought out his friends, moving through his social circles with a newfound urgency. He wanted to immerse himself in the easy camaraderie, the shared laughter, the simple, uncomplicated act of being with other people. In these interactions, he was both fully present and strangely absent. He was a ghost at his own wake, sharing in conversations and experiences while carrying the quiet, solitary knowledge that he was about to vanish from their lives. Every handshake, every shared joke was an unspoken goodbye, a final attempt to gather enough human connection to sustain him through the long, lonely period of disconnection that lay ahead. He also sought solace in the elemental forces of the natural world, a stark contrast to the artificial, man-made universe of code he had once inhabited. He made trips to the beach, drawn to the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean. He would stand at the edge of the water, feeling the rhythmic pull of the tide, a force so much older and more powerful than the transient, fleeting world of government and law. The warmth of the sun on his skin, the sharp, clean scent of the salt in the air, the feel of the sand beneath his feet, these were simple, grounding sensations. They were a connection to something real, something timeless, a final anchor in the physical world before he was to be confined to a place made entirely of concrete and steel, a place without a horizon. But it was on the long, straight stretches of asphalt, late at night, that he found his most potent form of release. With his control over the digital world completely severed, he sought a new kind of mastery, a new arena where his focus, his skill, and his nerve could be put to the test. He threw himself into the underground world of street racing. This was more than a reckless search for a cheap thrill. It was a deeply meditative and spiritual practice. It was a place where he could reclaim the sense of absolute control that had been so violently stripped from him. In the intimate mechanical world of a modified car, he found a new kind of system to understand and to master. The connection between the driver and the machine was a physical and intuitive one, a relationship of trust and immediate feedback. The deep, resonant vibration of the engine, the precise feel of the steering wheel in his hands, the intoxicating smell of gasoline and hot rubber. These were the new sensory inputs that replaced the cool, sterile glow of a computer monitor. When a race began, the world outside the windshield would narrow and sharpen, the complexities of his situation dissolving into a single, clear objective. All that existed was the road ahead, the machine beneath him, and the delicate dance of speed and control. This state of profound focus was a direct parallel to the deep immersion he had experienced while hacking. It was a state of flow, a place where time itself seemed to warp, and the self-conscious mind fell silent, replaced by pure, reactive instinct. The physical risk was immense, but it was precisely this risk that made it so meaningful. In a life where he had lost all agency, where his future was being dictated by others, the act of guiding a powerful machine along the razor's edge of its capabilities was a radical and empowering act of self-determination. A victory in a street race, whether by an inch or a mile, was a moment of pure, unambiguous success. It was a feeling he desperately needed in a life that was about to be defined by a total and catastrophic defeat. Throughout this 2-week period, he existed in a strange and poignant duality. He was more alive than he had ever been, his senses heightened by the awareness of his limited time. Yet, he was also already gone. He was a memory in the making, a ghost moving through the final scenes of his own life, observing each moment with a kind of detached clarity. Every conversation, every sunset, Every victorious rush of adrenaline was a last time. He was living out a conclusion that had already been written, filling the final, empty pages of a chapter before the book was to be slammed shut. The final sunset of his 2 weeks of freedom was no more or less beautiful than any other. The frenetic activity of his farewell tour gave way to a quiet, somber acceptance. The engine of his car fell silent, the voices of his friends faded into memory, and all that was left was the quiet certainty of the coming morning and the cold, hard finality of the judgment that awaited him. The weight of judgment. A courtroom is a place of stories. It is a theater of quiet, formal conflict where competing narratives are presented, weighed, and measured against the unyielding calculus of the law. On a solemn October day in the year 2003, a federal judge listened to the story of a bank in Colorado, of a defaced website, and of a young man who possessed the rare and unsettling ability to walk through digital walls as if they were made of mist. When the lawyers had finished, the judge prepared to tell a story of his own. It was not a tale of technical exploits or of youthful rebellion. It was a simple, ancient story, one of consequences. The atmosphere of a federal courtroom is designed to impress upon all who enter it the immense impersonal power of the state. The ceilings are high, the wood is dark and heavy, and the air itself feels cool and still, weighted with the gravity of the decisions made within its walls. At the front of the room, the Great Seal of the United States serves as a constant, silent reminder of the authority being wielded. In this space, there are no hats allowed, a small but significant rule that serves to strip away all external identities. The elaborate, carefully constructed personas of the outside world are of no value here. One does not stand before the court as a handle or an alias. And so, on that October morning, the hacker known as Doggy G ceased to exist. In his place stood Tommy DeVos, a 19-year-old man, waiting to hear the final accounting of his actions. The 2 weeks of frantic, borrowed freedom had come to an end. The roar of his car's engine, the laughter of his friends, the scent of the ocean air, it all now seemed like a distant, fading dream. He stood before the judge and, in a quiet, steady voice, pleaded guilty. The prosecution, in possession of a mountain of evidence from his confiscated machines, had focused the full weight of their case onto a single, indefensible charge. One count of violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for breaking into a computer system that controls interstate commerce. Of the hundreds of systems he had breached, it was this one that had sealed his fate. The target had been a website called Bank Colo, the online presence of the Colorado Bank and Trust Company. This was his most critical and consequential miscalculation. To the federal government, an incursion into the systems of a private corporation is a serious matter. But an incursion into the systems of a banking institution is a transgression of an entirely different order. Banks are federally regulated and insured, their stability a cornerstone of the national economy. As such, any crime that targets them is automatically elevated to a federal offense, guaranteeing the involvement of the nation's most powerful and well-resourced law enforcement agencies. By leaving his digital signature on the website of a bank, he had inadvertently triggered an immune response from the deepest levels of the system, ensuring that his case would be pursued with a relentless and uncompromising vigor. He had knocked on the one door that was certain to be answered by an overwhelming and decisive force. After the plea was entered, the judge asked him to rise. A deep silence fell over the courtroom. The judge looked at him for a long moment, his gaze not angry but analytical, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud or theatrical. It was calm, measured, and carried with it a disarming and unnerving perception. "Mr. DeVos," the judge began, his words cutting cleanly through the still air, "I do not believe that you are sorry for anything that you have done. I think the only reason that you are showing any remorse whatsoever is because of the fact that you got caught. The words landed with the force of an undeniable truth. In that single, incisive statement, the judge had dismantled any pretense of repentance. He had looked past the scared teenager standing before him and had seen the unrepentant thrill-seeker, the addicted puzzle solver, the brilliant practitioner who was not sorry for the act, but only for the outcome. There was no more room for stories, no more space for justification. There was only the quiet, stark reality of the judgment to come. The judge then pronounced the sentence. He delivered it not as a single, crushing blow, but as a series of deliberate, carefully measured weights, each one being placed upon the scales of justice. The first was the sentence of incarceration, 27 months in a federal prison. Nearly 2.5 years of his life were to be spent in confinement. The second was a sentence of exile, a 10-year ban from computers, from cell phones, from any device that could communicate with the outside world. He was being banished from the only kingdom where he had ever felt powerful, competent, and truly alive. The third was a sentence of continued supervision, 5 years of probation to be served after his release, a long shadow that would follow him well into his adult life. And the final weight was the sentence of debt, $100,000 in restitution, a staggering sum that represented a lifetime of earnings for a young man with no legitimate career and a newly acquired criminal record. Tommy stood there, absorbing the totality of this new reality. But the final, and perhaps most shocking, part of the sentence was yet to come. He had walked into the courtroom that day with the naive expectation that, even if the sentence was severe, he would be allowed to walk back out. He assumed he would be given a future date to surrender, a final few weeks or a month to put his affairs in order and say his goodbyes. The judge, having laid out the terms of the punishment, delivered the final, procedural words that would shatter this illusion. I now place you in the custody of the United States Marshals to serve your sentence. The words seemed to destabilize the very ground beneath his feet. The strength in his legs gave way, and he felt his knees begin to buckle. The immediate, irrevocable finality of the statement was a shock to his entire system. The world seemed to dissolve into a blur of sound and motion. He was not going home. His freedom was not ending in 30 days. It was ending now. The transition from a free citizen to a federal prisoner was not a gradual process. It was an instantaneous and brutal transformation, enacted by a single sentence spoken in a quiet room. The gentle, metallic click of handcuffs being secured around his wrists was the last sound he would hear of his former life. A firm but not unkind hand was placed on his back, and he was guided away from his family, away from the open courtroom, and toward a solid, heavy door. He had walked into the room as Tommy DeVos, a young man with a unique and dangerous gift. He was now leaving as federal inmate 38141-083, a number about to begin a long and arduous journey through the concrete heart of the system he had tried and failed to outsmart, the concrete and the ink. In the world outside, identity is a fluid and changing thing, a collection of choices, relationships, and aspirations that we present to the world. But within the gray, unyielding walls of a federal prison, identity is the first thing to be taken away. It is systematically dismantled, stripped down to its most basic components, and then replaced with a simple, sterile, and unchangeable number. To reclaim a sense of self in such a place, to hold on to the story of who you were and who you might yet become, one must find new and more permanent ways to write that story, sometimes with a repurposed needle, a bit of soot and ash, and the living canvas of your own skin. The transition from the open world to the closed one was a jarring descent into a different state of being. The heavy, resonant sound of steel doors sliding shut became the new punctuation of his days. The clothes he wore were replaced by a uniform, a coarse and colorless garment designed to erase individuality. His personal possessions were gone, and with them, the last tangible links to his former life. And his name, Tommy DeVos, was supplanted by a string of digits. Federal inmate number 38141-083. This number was more than just an administrative tool. It was a brand, a permanent and public record of his transgression. In the complex social hierarchy of the federal prison system, the final 3 digits of an inmate's number told a story. They signified the judicial district where the conviction occurred. For him, the number 083 would forever mark him as a product of the Eastern District of Virginia, the geographical point where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. The world he now inhabited was a stark and brutal inversion of the one he had left behind. The digital realm had been a place of boundless, abstract space, of silent, instantaneous communication across vast distances. The prison was an intensely physical, claustrophobic, and relentlessly loud environment. It was a world of concrete and steel, of echoing shouts and the constant jarring clang of metal on metal. The freedom to move at will, to explore, and to create was replaced by a rigid and monotonous routine dictated by bells, by counts, and by the unyielding schedule of the institution. The pace of his life, which had once moved at the speed of light through fiber optic cables, now slowed to a heavy, shuffling crawl. Each day an almost perfect repetition of the one that had come before. This was a place designed to break the spirit through the sheer, grinding weight of its predictability. In the face of this systematic erasure of self, he turned to one of the oldest and most enduring forms of human expression, the art of the tattoo. In the clandestine economy of the prison, where currency was contraband and services were paid for in traded goods and favors, a tattoo was a powerful act of personal reclamation. It was a way to decorate the walls of one's own small prison, to assert a measure of control over the one thing that was still truly his own body. The process itself was an act of defiance, carried out in secret with improvised tools, a single sewing needle carefully attached to a pen, powered by the small motor from a contraband radio. The ink, a simple, sterile mixture of soot and clear liquid. His first tattoos were quiet reminders of the world he had lost. On each of his biceps, he had a small tribal-style design inked into his skin. One of them contained the letter T for his own initial. The other held the letter C for the girlfriend he had left behind on the outside. These were anchors to his past, small, permanent marks that connected him to a life that now seemed a distant and fading memory. They were a quiet declaration that, despite the uniform and the number, the man he used to be was still present, still breathing, just beneath the surface. As time wore on, the tattoos he acquired began to tell a different story. Not of who he had been, but of who he was becoming. He had the classic theatrical masks of comedy and tragedy inked onto his body, the smiling face on one bicep, the crying one on the other. Beneath them were the words, "Laugh now" and "Cry later." This was more than just a piece of art. It was the adoption of a philosophy, a mantra of survival learned in the crucible of confinement. It was an acknowledgement that, in a place of constant low-grade suffering, one had to find a way to endure the present moment, to push the emotional cost of survival into the future, to be paid at a later date. It was a promise to oneself that there would be a time for joy and a time for sorrow, but that neither could be fully experienced until this long, gray period of his life was over. He further embraced the narrative of his own downfall. On his right wrist, he had 3 small dots tattooed in a triangular pattern. This was a symbol known as puntos locos, the crazy points, a mark often associated with the Hispanic gang culture within the prison. To complete the thought, he had the words, "Crazy Life," inked onto the back of his arms, the word crazy on one side and life on the other. This was not a claim of gang affiliation, but a stark and honest acknowledgement of the choices that had led him to this place. It was a way of owning his story, of integrating the wild, reckless, and ultimately self-destructive path he had followed into his core identity. He was no longer running from his past. He was carrying it with him, etched permanently into his skin for all to see. Over the course of his 27-month sentence, his body slowly became a living journal, a chronicle of his time spent in the concrete wilderness. He had entered the system with only 5 or 6 tattoos, small, scattered remnants of his youth. By the time he was released, that number had grown to more than 25. Each new piece of ink was a milestone, a way of marking the slow, inexorable passage of time in a world where every day was the same. His skin became a roadmap of his journey, a personal and intricate tapestry woven from ink and memory. After 2 years, the steel gates finally opened, and he walked back into the sunlight, a man transformed, both inside and out. He had entered the prison as a boy who had lost his way in a digital world. He left as a man whose body was a testament to his time and a physical one. Each line of ink a silent reminder of the life he had lived and the hard-earned lessons he had learned within the walls. He was free, but the story of his confinement was now a permanent and visible part of him. A fleeting release. Freedom, after a long and profound absence, can feel like a foreign country. In the year 2006, Tommy returned to the world a young man of 22, his body a roadmap of the time he had lost, his mind carrying the heavy weight of the lessons he had learned. But he returned as a citizen with a different and more restrictive set of rules. The world he stepped back into had not stood still. In the 2 years he had been away, it had become even more deeply intertwined with the digital technologies he was now forbidden to touch. He was free from the physical walls of the prison, but he was now to be confined within a new, invisible cage, one constructed from the very terms of his probation. He was an exile, forbidden from setting foot in the only universe where he had ever felt truly alive. The conditions of his release were designed to be absolute, a firewall between his past and his future. For the next 10 years, he was banned from using computers, but the prohibition extended far beyond that. It encompassed cell phones, video game systems, and even fax machines. It was a sweeping and comprehensive ban on any device capable of communicating with another, a sentence designed to sever him completely from the network, to render him a permanent ghost in the new, connected age. The sheer difficulty of adhering to such a condition in the modern world was a constant and pressing challenge. The tendrils of technology had already woven themselves into the most mundane corners of everyday life. He would secure a job, only to find that the simple act of clocking in and out required an interaction with a computerized timekeeping system. He was not allowed to touch it. He would have to stand by and have another coworker enter his credentials for him, a small, daily reminder of his altered status, of the invisible barrier that separated him from the normal flow of society. He was a man out of time, an analog soul adrift in a digital world, his every interaction with the modern economy mediated by the forbearance of others. The rules were a constant chafing restraint, a reminder that, though he was walking free, he was still a prisoner of his past actions, his freedom a conditional and heavily monitored state of being. For the first 30 days, he made a genuine and concerted effort to live within these impossible boundaries. The memory of the steel doors, of the monotonous routine, of the profound and crushing loss of liberty was still fresh and raw in his mind. The fear of returning to that place was a powerful motivator. He did not touch a computer. He abstained from the drugs that had often accompanied his illicit activities. He walked a straight and narrow path, a quiet and disciplined existence that was a testament to his desire to leave the world of concrete and ink behind him forever. It was a period of fragile peace, a quiet, internal struggle against the powerful, gravitational pull of a lifetime of habit and a singular, all-consuming passion. A dam had been built against the currents of his old life, but the water pressure was immense, and the structure was beginning to show signs of strain. After a month of this rigid compliance, the dam finally broke. The intellectual hunger, the insatiable curiosity, the simple, addictive thrill of solving the puzzle, it was too powerful to resist. His return to the keyboard was not a bold or defiant act of rebellion. It was a quiet, furtive, and almost mournful capitulation to the deepest parts of his nature. He found a way to acquire a machine, and in the quiet solitude of his room, he reconnected to the world he had been forced to abandon. He began, once again, to deface websites. It was a familiar rhythm, a return to the only craft where he had ever felt a sense of true mastery and control. He was not driven by a desire to cause harm, but by a desperate need to feel competent again, to prove to himself that his skills, his true identity, had not been erased by his time away. This new chapter of his hacking career was defined by a constant gnawing paranoia. His previous exploits had been characterized by a youthful sense of invincibility. Now, his every action was shrouded in fear and a meticulous, obsessive caution. He architected his physical space to reflect his psychological state. His computer desk was positioned next to a window, one that allowed him to see out into the driveway, but which was angled in such a way that no one could easily see in. He was a watchman at his own private outpost, constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of a threat. He developed a frantic and practiced ritual of concealment. The sound of an unfamiliar car engine, the sight of a strange vehicle pulling into his driveway, was enough to trigger a surge of adrenaline and a flurry of desperate activity. In a matter of seconds, he would leap from his chair, power down the machine, and begin the process of taking his entire desktop computer apart. It was a panicked but methodical disassembly. The motherboard would be hidden in one part of the house, the hard drive in another. The memory sticks would be stashed in a separate location, the power supply somewhere else entirely. He would scatter the constituent parts of his digital self to the various corners of his home, a desperate attempt to erase any evidence of its existence. Only when the machine had been completely broken down and hidden away would he go to answer the door, his heart pounding, his demeanor a carefully constructed mask of calm. This was his life for months, a stressful and exhausting existence lived on a razor's edge, a constant oscillation between the deep, focused calm of hacking and the frantic, paranoid terror of being caught. But the end of this fleeting and stressful period of freedom did not come as the result of a sophisticated digital investigation or a dramatic, tactical raid. It came in the form of a routine and unannounced visit from his probation officer. The officer arrived, and the familiar wave of panic washed over him. He performed his frantic ritual, disassembling his computer and scattering its components with a practiced, desperate haste. He hid everything: the power cords, the monitor, the central processing unit, the mouse. He was certain that every piece of incriminating evidence had been successfully concealed. He greeted the officer at the door and led him inside. They engaged in the quiet, formal conversation of their respective roles. The officer inspected his room, his eyes scanning the space for any sign of a violation. And then he saw it. It was not a hidden hard drive or a misplaced motherboard. It was something far more simple, something so mundane that it had been completely overlooked in his panicked rush to hide the more complex components. Lying on his bed, in plain and undeniable sight, was a simple, inert plastic keyboard. There was no argument to be made, no plausible denial to be offered. In the quiet stillness of the room, the simple plastic rectangle on the bed was a silent and irrefutable confession, an object that spoke with more authority and finality than any spoken word. The fleeting, paranoid freedom was over, and the familiar, heavy doors of the system were already beginning to swing shut. The pain of repetition. There is a unique and profound cruelty in repeating a lesson that has not been learned. For a second time, Tommy DeVos had traded his fragile freedom for the familiar, cold embrace of the system. This time, however, the system's response would be different. It would not be a simple matter of confinement, of serving out a sentence in a single, stable location. The patience of the court had been exhausted. The system would now employ a new and more psychologically taxing set of tools, designed not just to punish the body, but to disorient the mind. It was to be a long and arduous journey through the harshest and most desolate corners of the federal prison system, a form of quiet bureaucratic therapy designed to break a stubborn and recalcitrant spirit. The violation itself had been a quiet and almost pathetic affair, a simple keyboard left on a bed, but it was compounded by a failed drug test, and together they formed an undeniable pattern of non-compliance. The court's response was swift and severe. He was sentenced to the maximum term allowed for his probation violation, 14 months. This time, there was no fortnight of borrowed freedom, no chance for a farewell tour. He was taken directly from the courtroom and plunged back into the churning, impersonal machinery of the correctional system. His journey began not with a transfer to a permanent facility, but with an introduction to a practice known within the system as diesel therapy. The name is a grimly evocative one, derived from the constant low rumble of the diesel engines of the buses and transport vans that carry inmates from one institution to another. It is a deliberate and calculated strategy of disorientation. An inmate subjected to diesel therapy is kept in a perpetual state of transit, never allowed to settle in one place long enough to establish a routine, to form relationships, or to gain any sense of stability. They are kept in a constant, stressful limbo, shuttled between holding centers and penitentiaries, their destination always unknown, their future a permanent and unsettling question mark. It is a quiet and highly effective form of psychological warfare, a way of using the sheer, sprawling geography of the prison system to isolate and break down an individual. His first stop was a facility in Petersburg, Virginia. Here, he was not placed in the general population. He was taken immediately to solitary confinement, a small, concrete room where the world is reduced to a bed, a toilet, and the unyielding sameness of the four walls. For 3 weeks, he lived in this state of profound sensory deprivation. The noise and chaotic energy of prison life were replaced by an oppressive, ringing silence. The days bled into one another, unmarked by any meaningful event, the passage of time becoming a fluid and unreliable concept. It was a period of forced and total introspection, a confrontation with the self in its most isolated and unadorned state. Just as he was beginning to acclimate to this stark reality, he was moved. He was taken from his cell, shackled, and placed on a transport bus, its diesel engine a low and constant hum. His destination was United States Penitentiary, Atlanta, a maximum security prison with a formidable and violent reputation. Upon his arrival, the process repeated itself. He was once again placed in solitary confinement, another 3 weeks of silent, monotonous isolation in a new and more intimidating environment. He was being passed through the deepest and most intimidating levels of the system, a ghost being shown the various hells that awaited those who repeatedly broke the rules. From Atlanta, the journey continued. He was transferred again, this time to a medium-high security prison in Williamsburg, South Carolina. And again, he was first placed in solitary for a period of several weeks before finally being released onto the actual compound, into the general population. This long, drawn-out, and disorienting pilgrimage was the full expression of the system's displeasure. It was a clear and unambiguous message, delivered not through words, but through the brute mechanics of institutional logistics. By the time he was finally allowed to begin serving his sentence in a stable environment, he had already been thoroughly broken down, isolated, and reminded of his absolute powerlessness within the vast, interconnected network of the federal prison system. After serving his 14 months, he was once again released, but the final and most consequential chapter of this ordeal was yet to be written. On October 28th of the year 2009, he found himself standing in a familiar place, the same quiet, wood-paneled courtroom where his journey into the system had begun. And sitting before him, once again, was the same man, Judge Payne. This was the third time he had stood before this particular judge for a computer-related crime. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with the weight of this shared history. There was no longer any question of his guilt, no more need for the presentation of evidence. There was only the final, definitive judgment. Judge Payne looked at him, his expression one of weary finality. The judge had seen this young man's potential, had given him a second chance, and had seen that chance squandered. The time for leniency, for rehabilitation, for any consideration of mitigating circumstances was over. The judge spoke, his voice calm and steady, but his words carried the unmistakable weight of an absolute and final ultimatum. He told Tommy that if he ever, for any reason, saw him standing in his courtroom again for a computer crime, the sentence would be immediate, and it would be the maximum sentence he was allowed to give. He would sentence him to life in prison. The words hung in the cold, still air of the courtroom. Life in prison. It was not a distant, abstract threat. It was a direct, personal, and utterly believable promise from a man who had the power to enforce it. In that moment, the entire calculus of his life shifted. The thrill of hacking, the intellectual satisfaction of solving the puzzle, the intoxicating feeling of digital power, it all shriveled and died in the face of that one terrifying phrase. The game, which he had played for so long with such reckless abandon, was finally and truly over, because he had just been shown a consequence from which there would be no recovery, no release date, and no second chances. The abstract risk that had always been a part of his calculations had now become a concrete and horrifying certainty. The thought of his daughter, of her growing up with a father who was nothing more than a name and a number in a prison file, became an unbearable and clarifying thought. The love of the craft, the addiction to the intellectual chase, was, at last, and for all time, eclipsed by the simple, primal desire to be free and to be a father. The judge's words did not feel like a sentence, they felt like a prophecy. In the cold, quiet air of the courtroom, the ghost of Doggy G, the thrill-seeking black hat who had once roamed the digital world with a sense of untouchable power, finally and truly died. All that was left was Tommy DeVos, a man who now understood, with perfect and terrifying clarity, the ultimate price of his addiction. A new path unfolds. On the 3rd of November, in the year 2010, the great heavy weight of the system was finally and completely lifted. After years of incarceration and the long probationary shadow that followed, Tommy DeVos was a truly free man. The constant low-grade hum of being watched, the quiet, persistent fear of a misstep, dissolved into the stillness of a normal life. He was no longer constrained, no longer a person of interest. But this new, untethered freedom brought with it a profound and daunting question, one that would come to define the next chapter of his life. What does a master locksmith do when all the doors he knows how to pick are now and forever forbidden? The first taste of this new freedom was the simple, unremarkable act of using a computer without looking over his shoulder. For the first time in a decade, he could sit before a screen, his fingers resting on a keyboard, and not feel the cold dread of imminent discovery. It was a quiet and deeply personal reunion, a reconnection with a part of himself that had been forcibly amputated by the terms of his sentence. The world he logged back into was both familiar and strangely new. The basic architecture of the internet was the same, but it had grown faster, more complex, and more deeply integrated into the fabric of everyday life. He felt a powerful and immediate desire to find his place within it, not as an outsider or an antagonist, but as a legitimate and contributing member. His ambition was to walk the straightest possible path. He wanted to go to college, to formally study the subject that he had mastered in the shadows. He wanted to get a legitimate job in the technology industry, to apply his unique and powerful skill set in a constructive and socially acceptable way. The threat of Judge Payne's final ultimatum had been a profound and effective deterrent. The life of the Black Hat was a closed book, a story he had no desire to ever revisit. He was ready to build a new life, to trade the illicit thrill of the hack for the quiet stability of a 9-to-5 job, a regular paycheck, and the simple dignity of a normal career. But the legitimate world, he would soon discover, had its own set of impenetrable walls. Between the years 2010 and 2013, he found himself trapped in a frustrating and demoralizing cycle of hope and rejection. He would diligently search for openings in the computer industry, sending out applications, his mind filled with the technical solutions he could offer. Occasionally, he would get a response, an invitation for an interview. In those meetings, his knowledge and his passion for the subject were undeniable. He could speak the language of systems and networks with a fluency that few could match. He would leave these interviews feeling a sense of optimism, a belief that his skills had finally shone through, that a company would be willing to look past his history, and then, inevitably, would come the background check. The process would stall, the communication would become sparse, and the final polite rejection would arrive. The label of a federal conviction, especially one for computer fraud, was a permanent and insurmountable barrier. In the risk-averse world of corporate information technology, he was not seen as a uniquely skilled individual with a troubled past. He was seen as a liability, an unknown variable, a potential identity thief. The very skills that made him a formidable hacker also made him unemployable in the eyes of the legitimate world. So, he returned to the world of manual labor. He found work as a cook, and in construction, his days filled with the simple, honest fatigue of physical exertion. There was a stark and painful irony in his situation. He possessed a world-class, highly specialized, and increasingly valuable skill, yet he was earning a living, digging ditches, and working in kitchens because society had no category for him, no path for a person with his particular history to find redemption. He was a master locksmith, his hands now calloused from a shovel, the intricate knowledge in his mind lying dormant, a powerful engine without a vehicle to move. He felt the old temptations, the itch to once again become dog-eat and explore the forbidden digital landscapes. But the memory of the judge's final words was a permanent and effective shield against that impulse. He was trapped between a past he could not return to and a future that would not have him. It was in this quiet period of struggle and frustration that he began to hear the first whispers of a new and evolving idea in the world of cybersecurity. It was a concept known as a bug bounty. The idea was simple, yet revolutionary. For decades, the relationship between corporations and hackers had been a purely adversarial one. Companies built digital walls, and hackers, for various reasons, tried to climb over them. When they succeeded, the response was legal action. But a few forward-thinking companies were beginning to reconsider this dynamic. They were starting to see the community of skilled hackers not as a threat, but as a vast, untapped resource, a global team of freelance security auditors who could find flaws that their internal teams might have missed. The bug bounty model flipped the traditional script. Instead of threatening prosecution, companies began to offer a reward. The message was a radical departure from the past. If you can find a verifiable security flaw in our systems, and if you report it to us privately and responsibly, we will thank you for it, and we will pay you for your time. It was like a building owner leaving a note on the front door, offering a cash prize to anyone who could find a window that had been accidentally left unlocked. It was a pragmatic and powerful shift in perspective, from punishing trespassers to rewarding explorers. Two main platforms, websites called HackerOne and BugCrowd, had emerged as the central marketplaces for this new economy, connecting skilled researchers with companies willing to pay for their expertise. For Tommy, the discovery of this concept was like seeing a light appear in a long, dark tunnel. It was a potential third path, a way forward that was neither the illegal world of the black hat nor the legitimate corporate world that had so thoroughly rejected him. It was a way to be the locksmith and get paid for it, with the explicit and enthusiastic permission of the owner of the house. He navigated to the HackerOne website, his curiosity piqued. The page was not a cryptic forum or a hidden server. It was a bright, professional, and public-facing marketplace. It was a list of invitations, a catalog of some of the biggest and most respected companies in the world, all of them openly asking to be tested. He scrolled down the list of names, and then he saw it. It was a name that was intimately familiar to him, a name that had been a fixture of his youth, a symbol of the vast corporate internet he had once treated as his personal playground. It was Yahoo. The company was listed there, with a public and active bug bounty program, offering to pay anyone who could find a flaw in their systems. He sat there for a long moment, in the quiet glow of the monitor, a feeling of profound and surreal disbelief washing over him. The world had changed in a fundamental way while he had been gone. The very same activity that had once been the cornerstone of a federal indictment, the very act that had led him on a long, painful journey through the criminal justice system, was now being presented to him as a legitimate and lucrative profession. All the forbidden doors were suddenly, inexplicably, standing wide open, not to be broken into, but to be knocked upon, and perhaps to be welcomed inside. The question was no longer what he was forbidden from doing, but what he was now, for the first time in his life, being invited to become. The first bounty. There is a profound and unsettling strangeness in being rewarded for an act that you have only ever been punished for. It is a fundamental inversion of the rules of one's world, a moment so surreal that it forces a complete reevaluation of everything you thought you knew to be true. In March of the year 2016, Tommy DeVos sat down at his computer, his fingers tracing the familiar, well-worn pathways into the digital architecture of Yahoo's systems. The motions were the same, the intellectual process was identical. The deep, focused state of mind was a perfect echo of his past. This time, however, he was not a trespasser, but an invited guest. He was a locksmith who had been handed the blueprints to the building and asked politely to see if he could find any unlocked doors. The psychological shift required for this new kind of work was immense. For years, his every interaction with a corporate network had been a clandestine affair, a dance of stealth and evasion where the primary objective, after finding a flaw, was to cover his tracks and vanish without a trace. Now, that entire paradigm was turned on its head. The goal was not to remain unseen, but to see, and then to report, with as much clarity and detail as possible. He moved through Yahoo's vast and complex systems, not as a predator seeking a weakness to exploit, but as a careful and curious architect, examining the work of his peers, looking for the small oversights and human errors that inevitably creep into any complex creation. He was a hunter who had been invited into the preserve, his instincts the same, but his purpose transformed from conquest to conservation. He began by exploring the periphery of the company's digital footprint, the public-facing services and tools used by their own developers. It was here, in the quiet, unassuming corners of their infrastructure, that he found his first vulnerability. It was not the result of a sophisticated, brute force attack, nor did it require the deployment of any complex, malicious code. The flaw was a simple and elegant one, a quiet testament to the fallibility of human habit. He discovered that many of Yahoo's system administrators and developers were using a popular code-sharing tool called Gist. It was a digital scratchpad, a place to quickly share snippets of code, configuration files, and technical notes with colleagues. The critical error was not in the use of the tool itself, but in how it was being used. Time and time again, the developers were forgetting to mark their notes as private, or neglecting to delete them after they were no longer needed. The result was a series of profound and consequential information leaks. It was the digital equivalent of an architect drawing up the blueprints for a new skyscraper, making a few photocopies for the engineering team, and then accidentally leaving a stack of those copies on a public park bench for anyone to find. Quietly, methodically, he began to collect these publicly accessible notes. The information they contained was a startling inventory of the company's most sensitive internal secrets. He found internal passwords, the keys to various parts of the corporate kingdom. He found database credentials, the usernames and passwords that would grant direct access to the vast repositories of user data and operational information. He even found detailed network maps, the very blueprints of Yahoo's internal infrastructure, laying out the connections between their most critical servers. He was not breaking down any doors. He was simply walking through the ones that had been left wide open, the keys still hanging in the locks. With his findings carefully documented, he began a process that was entirely new to him. He logged into the HackerOne platform and started to write his first bug report. This act was the antithesis of his entire former life. Instead of concealing his methods, he was detailing them. Instead of covering his tracks, he was drawing a clear and precise map of his journey, complete with screenshots and technical explanations. He was announcing his presence not as an adversary, but as a collaborator. He submitted the report, and then he waited. This period of anticipation was a new and unfamiliar feeling. It was not the cold, gnawing fear of a federal raid. It was the quiet, professional anxiety of a consultant who has just delivered a difficult truth to a new client. Was this new world real? Would they see the value in what he had found? Or would they see him as the same black hat he had once been? A few days later, a notification arrived. His report had been reviewed, the vulnerability had been confirmed, and the case had been closed. A bounty had been awarded. The amount was $300. He looked at the number on the screen, and the feeling that washed over him was not one of triumphant excitement, but of a deep, profound, and almost paralyzing disbelief. It was real. The entire improbable concept was real. The world had fundamentally and irrevocably changed while he had been away. A corporation, one of the largest on the planet, had thanked him for breaking into their systems, and then they had paid him for it. The $300 was far more than just money. It was a symbol, a token of his acceptance into a new and legitimate world. It was the first dollar he had ever earned, not in spite of his skills, but because of them. This first, small bounty was the proof of concept. It confirmed that the path was real. The events that followed, in May of 2016, would prove that the path could be a viable and life-altering career. A new, widespread vulnerability had just been discovered in the cybersecurity community, a flaw in a common piece of software called image magic. This software was used by countless websites to process and modify images that users uploaded. The vulnerability, in simple terms, allowed a person to hide a secret set of instructions inside an otherwise normal-looking image file. When a website server used the image magic software to process the image, it would unknowingly read and execute those hidden instructions, giving the sender a foothold inside the system. It was like a Trojan horse, delivered in the guise of a simple photograph. Armed with this new, publicly known vulnerability, Tommy began to methodically test Yahoo's various servers to see if they were susceptible. He found one and then another. These were not minor information leaks. These were critical flaws that could grant an attacker what was known as remote code execution, a deep and powerful level of control over the affected server. He reported his findings. The first successful exploit earned him a bounty of $1,000. The following week, he found the same flaw on a different server, and this time the payout was the full $4,000. The escalation was staggering. In the span of a few short weeks, he had gone from a tentative first step to earning thousands of dollars for a few days of work. The quiet, surreal disbelief of his first bounty began to give way to a dawning and electrifying realization of the true potential of this new world. The name Doggy G, once a whisper in the digital underground and a name on a federal indictment, was now being written on payments issued by the very corporations he once targeted. He was no longer a ghost in the machine, but a highly valued and very well-paid mechanic, and he was only just beginning to learn the true power of his craft. The green hat. The world often thinks in a simple and convenient binary of black and white, the criminal and the protector, the trespasser and the guardian. For years, Tommy DeVos had worn the black hat, a symbol of his journey through the digital underground. Now, he was being welcomed into the world of the white hats, those who worked to defend the very systems he once sought to breach. But as his journey progressed, it became clear that he was walking a new and different path, one defined not by simple morality, but by merit, skill, and a staggering degree of success. He was beginning to weave for himself a new kind of hat, one of a different color entirely. It was a green hat, the color of money legitimately earned, and it would become the symbol of his stunning and almost unbelievable ascent. His first full year in the world of bug bounties, 2016, had been a period of quiet acclimation, of learning the rules and rhythms of this new and unfamiliar economy. His earnings were modest, somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000, a respectable income, but hardly a fortune. It was proof that the concept was real, but the true potential of this path was not yet fully apparent. In 2017, however, something within him shifted. He made a conscious and deliberate decision to transform this tentative new venture into a serious and singular profession. He set a clear and ambitious goal for himself: to earn $100,000 in a single year. This goal required a new level of dedication and focus. The work was demanding, an endless intellectual marathon of research, analysis, and creative problem solving. He spent countless hours in front of his screen, his mind immersed in the intricate and complex architectures of his target companies. He was no longer just a curious explorer. He was a dedicated professional, a digital artisan honing his craft with a relentless and single-minded purpose. By the end of the year, he had not only met his goal, but had surpassed it, earning somewhere between $115,000 and $200,000. He had proven to himself that this was not just a fluke, but a sustainable and highly lucrative career. If 2017 was the year he became a professional, then 2018 was the year he ascended into the ranks of the elite. His earnings skyrocketed, reaching a level that placed him in a small and rarefied group of the world's most successful ethical hackers. Across the various platforms he worked on, his combined income for the year was somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000. He was no longer just a participant in the bug bounty economy. He was one of its most formidable and productive forces. This newfound wealth allowed him to pursue a dream that had been planted in his mind years earlier, a passion inspired by the high-octane spectacle of the Fast and the Furious films. He had long been captivated by the sleek, powerful lines of the Nissan Skyline, a car that was a legend in the world of street racing. In January of 2018, a strange and almost magical confluence of events would turn this distant dream into a tangible reality. The story began not with a massive success, but with a small and almost disappointing bounty of $175. Feeling a bit frustrated, he decided to do something impulsive with the small sum. He took the money and, leveraging his deep understanding of statistics and patterns, placed a series of bets on international basketball games. Over the course of a single weekend, through a stunning combination of skill, intuition, and luck, that small $175 seed blossomed into an astonishing $133,000. It was a life-altering sum, earned in a matter of days. He immediately withdrew $50,000 from his account, and with the cash in hand, he went out and bought his first dream car. It was a 1992 Nissan Skyline. It was not the top-of-the-line GTR model he had always coveted, but it was a Skyline nonetheless. The feeling of sitting behind the wheel, of holding in his hands the physical manifestation of a childhood fantasy, was a powerful and deeply satisfying confirmation of his new life. His skills were no longer just producing abstract numbers on a screen. They were producing real, tangible objects of beauty and power. As the year progressed, his success continued to build, one bounty at a time. The payouts were a steady rhythm, a few $100s here, a few thousand there, each one another small validation of his chosen path. And then came October 18th, a day that would solidify his status as a legend in the bug bounty community. On that day, he was focused on a system known as Nexus RF. As he explored its intricate code, he discovered a critical and systemic flaw. It was a vulnerability known as a server-side request forgery, a complex name for a simple but powerful concept. In essence, he had found a way to bypass the system's internal security blacklist. The discovery was like finding a single flawed master key that, with a slight modification, could be used to open not just one, but a multitude of different secure doors within the same building. He began to test this bypass methodically, applying it to one endpoint after another within the company's network. He found that the same fundamental flaw existed in 16 separate places. Each one was a distinct and valid vulnerability. He carefully documented each one and submitted 16 separate reports to the bug bounty program. The company quickly confirmed his findings. The bounty for each vulnerability was $10,000. On that one October day, the payments began to arrive. $10,000, and then another, and then another. A steady cascade of notifications that, by the end of the day, totaled $160,000. The feeling was, in his own words, unreal. It seemed too good to be true. He was a man who, just a decade earlier, was sitting in a federal prison cell, his future a bleak and uncertain landscape. Now, he had earned a sum of money in a single day that was more than most people earn in several years of hard work. He had set a new record for the highest amount of bounties paid to a single researcher in a single day. The contrast between his past and his present was a source of constant and quiet astonishment. The very skills that had once led him to disgrace and incarceration were now the source of a level of wealth and success that he had never imagined possible. The numbers in his bank account had become almost abstract, a testament to a unique talent that the world was only just beginning to properly understand and value. He had achieved a level of success beyond his wildest dreams, but the most difficult challenge still lay ahead. Learning how to bridge the vast distance between his new life in the digital glow and the quiet, human world that existed just outside his door. The full circle. A life's trajectory is rarely a straight and predictable line. More often, it is a winding and circuitous path, filled with detours and reversals. A long and looping journey that sometimes, with enough time and perspective, can resemble a circle, returning to its beginning, but from a higher and more illuminated place. The same unique and dangerous set of skills that had once led a young boy down a dark road to federal prison were now, impossibly, building a new and prosperous life for him and his family. And the same vast, impersonal government that had once prosecuted him as an adversary was now, in a strange and symbolic turn of fate, asking for his help. The public validation of his transformation arrived in the form of a quiet, official announcement from the HackerOne platform. Tommy DeVos, the hacker once known as Doggy G, had become just the sixth person in the history of the platform to earn over $1 million in legitimate sanctioned bug bounties. The number was a staggering one, a testament to his relentless work ethic and his rare, intuitive gift for finding the hidden flaws in complex systems. The irony of the milestone was not lost on him. A significant portion of his adult life had been spent under the shadow of a $100,000 restitution order, a debt that had once seemed insurmountable. Now, he had earned 10 times that amount, not through illicit activity, but through a new and collaborative partnership with the very kinds of corporations he had once targeted. His success continued to accelerate. In the year 2019 alone, his earnings approached $1 million, a testament to his position at the absolute pinnacle of his new profession. But the most meaningful measure of his success was not in the abstract, growing numbers in his bank account. It was in how he began to translate that digital wealth into tangible acts of generosity and reconciliation in the physical world. The money became a tool, a way to mend the relationships that had been strained by his past, and to provide for the family that had endured the long, difficult years of his incarceration and probation. He began a quiet campaign of giving back, one car at a time. He bought his two 17-year-old nieces their very first cars. He bought one for his baby sister, who was about to turn 18. He bought a truck for one of his twin sisters who lived in Florida, and a car and a truck for her twin sister as well. In October, he bought his mother a Mustang, a gift of gratitude for her unwavering support through the darkest chapters of his life. The most difficult and important relationship to repair, however, was the one with his father. His father, a man from a different generation with a traditional view of work and life, still struggled to accept his son's strange and unconventional career. He viewed the world of bug bounties with a deep and abiding skepticism, seeing it not as a real job, but as a frivolous and potentially dangerous game. In his eyes, his son was wasting his life, and he worried that it was only a matter of time before he would lose it all again. In an attempt to bridge this generational and philosophical divide, Tommy devised a plan. He decided to buy his father a brand new truck, a powerful and practical symbol of his success. His plan was to simply park it in his father's driveway, leave the keys and the title inside, and let his father come home from a long day of work to find this undeniable and generous proof of his son's new life. But as he and his father slowly began to speak again, a quiet and tentative reconciliation began to bloom. When Tommy pitched the idea of the truck, his father, in a moment that signaled a profound shift in their relationship, had a different idea. His youngest sister, for whom Tommy had recently bought a car, had been driving it recklessly and had blown the engine. Instead of a new truck for himself, his father suggested, perhaps Tommy could use the money to buy his little sister another new car. It was a quiet, selfless, and deeply meaningful moment. It was an acknowledgement, however indirect, of his son's success, and a collaborative decision to use the fruits of that success for the good of the family. The father's acceptance was the one bounty he had been seeking that money could not buy. The ultimate and most surreal, full-circle moment of his journey was yet to come. It arrived in the form of an official invitation. HackerOne, the platform that had facilitated his redemption, asked him to travel to Washington, D.C. He was to be a featured speaker at a small, exclusive cybersecurity leadership meetup. The attendees would be high-ranking officials from a variety of United States government and military agencies. The quiet, almost unbelievable irony of the situation was profound. The man who had once been prosecuted by the federal government for hacking government and military systems was now being flown in as an honored guest, an expert consultant, to teach those very same institutions how to better defend themselves. He stood before them, not as a former criminal, but as a security researcher with a unique and invaluable perspective. He spoke about his work on the Department of Defense's bug bounty program, praising its wide and unrestricted scope. He explained, from his lived experience as a former black hat, that real adversaries do not care about the limited scope of a corporate program. They will attack whatever is vulnerable. His past was no longer a liability. It was his greatest asset. He could think like the enemy because he had once been the enemy. He was a living bridge between the two worlds, his journey a testament to a new, more pragmatic approach to cybersecurity, one that believes in the power of redemption and the value of an adversarial mindset. Even with all the success and the newfound respect, his journey was not without its lingering shadows. He found that, despite the immense financial rewards, he missed the structure and camaraderie of a traditional job. He began to look for a full-time position, in part to have a team to work with, and in part to finally have what his father would see as a real job. He was offered a promising position with one of the largest banks in the country, but the offer was rescinded after his background check. The ghosts of his past, it seemed, had not been completely exorcised. His story is a quiet testament to the idea that a life's path is not always a straight line, and that redemption can be found in the most unexpected of places. He is a man who traveled to the darkest corners of the digital world, who paid a heavy price for his transgressions, and who emerged on the other side not just redeemed, but revered. The world of cybersecurity is a constantly evolving landscape, a place where the lines between adversary and ally can sometimes blur, and where the most valuable guardians are, sometimes the ones who know the territory of the trespasser better than anyone else. He had found his place, a strange and perfect synthesis of his past and his present, a master locksmith, now celebrated for knowing how to find the open doors. Of course, here is a long, soothing outro to conclude the script, designed to match the established style and gently guide the listener towards sleep. And so, our story comes to a quiet close. The journey of the young man who called himself Doggy G, a long and looping path that took him from the shadows of the digital underground to the bright, legitimate world of a celebrated expert, finally finds its resting place. It is a story of transformation, a quiet testament to the idea that a life's trajectory is rarely a straight or predictable line. Sometimes it is a circle, a slow and patient return to the beginning, but from a higher and more illuminated place. The same rare and curious gift that led a boy down a path to prison became the very tool of his redemption, the key that unlocked a new and prosperous future, not just for himself, but for his family. His is a narrative that challenges our simple, convenient definitions of right and wrong, of protector and aggressor. The skills he possessed did not change. The context in which he used them did. The very same set of intellectual keys that could once open a forbidden door could also be used to test its lock, to find its weaknesses, and to show the owner how to make it stronger. The world, in its slow and often reluctant wisdom, had finally created a space for the locksmith, a way to value the one who knows how to pick the lock over the one who can only build the wall. It is a quiet revolution in the way we think about security, a shift from a posture of pure defense to one of collaborative discovery. The black hat and the white hat are not always opposites. Sometimes, they are merely different stages in the same long and complicated journey of understanding. As we leave his story, let us allow our focus to gently expand, to drift away from the life of one individual and to float out into the vast, unseen world that he once navigated with such intimate and audacious skill. Think, for a moment, of the digital universe that surrounds us at all times. We often imagine it as a place, a series of destinations we visit, a website, a social media feed, an online store, but in reality, it is more like a great and silent ocean, a global and interconnected body of information that is constantly in motion. Most of us spend our lives on the sunlit surface of this ocean, sailing between the familiar islands of our daily routine, unaware of the immense and complex world that exists just beneath the waves. But this ocean has its own geography, its own deep and hidden topography. It has vast, dark trenches where the light never reaches. It has powerful, unseen currents of data that flow between continents in the blink of an eye. It has a complex and thriving ecosystem of strange and wonderful life forms, packets of information, and autonomous programs that move through the depths with a purpose all their own. The individuals we call hackers, the ones like Tommy in his youth and in his present, are the deep-sea explorers of this digital ocean. They are the ones who are not content to simply skim the surface. They are driven by an insatiable need to understand the currents, to map the trenches, to study the strange and beautiful life that thrives in the crushing pressure of the abyss. Beneath this ocean, on the very seabed of our digital world, lies the foundation upon which everything is built. It is a silent and sprawling architecture of pure logic, billions upon billions of lines of code that dictate the rules of this new reality. This code is the invisible bedrock of our modern lives. It manages the flow of our finances, the logistics of our travel, the intricate web of our communications. It is the quiet humming ghost in the machine of our civilization. And every single line of this code, every single intricate instruction, was written by a human hand. And because it is a human creation, it is, by its very nature, imperfect. Within this vast and complex architecture, there are echoes of the millions of decisions, the countless hours of work, the moments of brilliance, and the moments of simple, human oversight that went into its construction. There are hidden passages and forgotten doorways. There are small, almost invisible cracks in the foundation, the digital equivalent of a hairline fracture in a massive concrete dam. It is the work of the ethical hacker, the bug bounty hunter, the modern explorer, to sail this vast ocean and to dive into its depths, not in search of treasure to plunder, but in search of these small and significant imperfections. Their work is a form of quiet, patient, and deeply focused meditation. It is the art of looking at a system not for what it is supposed to do, but for what it can be made to do. It is a process of asking endless questions, of testing every assumption, of gently pushing against every digital wall to see if it holds firm. An ethical hacker might spend days, or weeks, or even months studying a single piece of code, a single application, a single network. They are searching for the one misplaced instruction, the one logical oversight, the one small and elegant flaw that could allow the entire, carefully constructed edifice to be compromised. The moment of discovery is not a loud or explosive one. It is a quiet internal flicker of understanding, a sudden and satisfying click as a complex puzzle piece slides perfectly into place. It is the quiet thrill of seeing the system in a way that its own creators did not, of finding the one loose thread that, if pulled, could unravel the entire tapestry. And in that moment, they do not exploit the flaw for their own gain. They instead become the careful and meticulous cartographers of this hidden world. They draw a map detailing the precise location and nature of the flaw, and they deliver that map back to the architects of the system, a quiet and respectful gift of knowledge, a warning that allows the wall to be mended, the foundation to be reinforced. This is the quiet, essential work that is happening at every moment of every day, in the silent, humming spaces behind our screens. It is a global, collaborative effort to maintain the delicate balance of our digital world, to reinforce the fragile bonds of trust upon which our entire, interconnected society now depends. The internet was built on a foundational belief in openness and a shared desire for connection. The work of these digital locksmiths, in its own strange and paradoxical way, is an effort to preserve that original dream by finding and fixing the places where that trust is most vulnerable. And now, as our story fades into the quiet stillness of the night, allow your mind to drift with the gentle currents of this vast digital ocean. Picture the quiet, rhythmic pulse of data flowing through the fiber optic cables that lie on the cold, dark floor of the sea, great rivers of light connecting continents in an unbroken, silent conversation. Imagine the countless servers housed in vast, temperature-controlled data centers around the world, their small, steady lights blinking in the darkness like a galaxy of artificial stars, all of them processing, storing, and transmitting the collective dreams and memories of our world. This entire global machine has a rhythm, a quiet and steady breath of its own. It is a constant, gentle hum, the background radiation of our modern existence. It is a rhythm that you can feel, a rhythm that you can join. As you lie here, in the quiet comfort of your own space, begin to notice the gentle, steady rhythm of your own breath. The slow, easy rise as you inhale, and the long, soft release as you exhale. There is no need to change it, no need to control it. Simply notice it. It is a rhythm that has been with you your entire life. A quiet, constant companion. The air flows in and the air flows out. Just like the silent, steady flow of information that circles our globe. It is a process of constant, gentle exchange. Each breath is a quiet release of the day that has passed, of the thoughts that have occupied your mind, of the worries that have weighed upon your spirit. And each new breath is a quiet acceptance of the stillness of the present moment, a gentle immersion into the deep and peaceful quiet of the night. The story we have shared is now a part of the past, a collection of memories and ideas that you can allow to drift away, like small wooden boats on a calm and silent sea. The details will fade, the names will soften, and all that will remain is the gentle, rhythmic cadence of the telling. Allow your mind to become as calm and as still as the surface of a deep, moonlit lake. If thoughts should arise, as they often do, simply acknowledge them without judgment, and then gently guide your attention back to the simple, physical sensation of your breathing. The rise and the fall, the in and the out. A quiet, endless, and deeply restful rhythm. The world will continue to turn. The great digital ocean will continue to hum its silent song. But for you, now, there is nothing to do, nothing to solve, and nowhere to be. There is only the quiet, profound, and restorative act of rest. If these quiet journeys into the unseen worlds are a comfort to you, if you find a measure of solace in these stories that unfold in the stillness of the night, you can ensure that they continue to arrive in your feed as a quiet and reliable companion. You can do so by taking a moment, whenever it feels right, to subscribe to our channel. And if you know of someone else in your life who might find a similar peace in the quiet exploration of these complex worlds, a friend or a loved one whose mind is often busy, and who might benefit from a gentle, narrative guide toward rest, you can share this story with them. It can be a quiet and simple gift of rest in a world that is often too loud and too busy. But for now, all that is left to do is to let go. Let the stories fade, let the thoughts dissolve, and allow yourself to sink into the deep, restorative quiet that you so richly deserve. Rest now. Sleep well.